Today, I'm joined by my co host, Nicole, and our guest, Martha Boiardt, who has been an SLP since 2010. In 2014, she founded Miami Speech Therapy with the dream of creating a concierge private practice catering to the needs of individual clients and their families. She travels to homes and schools, working in constant communication with caregivers for a cohesive team approach. Martha is passionate about collaboration. She became certified in orofacial myology in December 2023 and has included OFM in her services ever since. When she's not working, she's navigating life with her husband, three children, Axel, Lucas, and Stella, and their pets, Allie and bird Sunny.
Martha, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add or talk about before we start talking about bilingual speech therapy?
No, I think that sounds pretty good. So we can just dive right in if you're ready. And Martha, we were talking before we came on here, but it's been such a pleasure to get to know you over the years. You're in South Florida like I am, and we've been able to work together or collaborate together on clients who needed AAC. And then we got to see each other again at ASHA 2023. So it's just really exciting to see where you were and how you've built up your private practice. And I imagine you have encountered a lot of challenges throughout that process. So what kind of challenges did you face in starting a bilingual speech and language practice?
Thank you so much, Benita. Yes, it's been amazing getting to reconnect with you and all of that. And well, starting a private practice is challenging. So, I originally started my private practice to gain some more flexibility around raising my family and all of that. But one of the biggest needs in South Florida is bilingual speech therapy. In my case, specifically in Spanish. However, I do work with families who Portuguese or Italian. I have run into some cases of children with language delays who speak Arabic. So basically the knowledge of bilingualism and how it affects a person's language development has been really important and so needed in this area. So that has been incredible. There've been two really big challenges to forming a bilingual practice. And one of them is the constant need for education of misconceptions. There's still a lot of medical professionals out there who are telling people to stick to one language to avoid confusion, which is just so false. And so I feel like I spend a lot of time just reframing that misconception. And another one of the challenges that I find is that there is a lack of quality materials in Spanish to target um, semantics and syntax in Spanish and things like that. And specific phonemes and English and Spanish are just so different from each other and have a lot of nuances that can't be addressed with adapted English language products. So, in a nutshell, that's been some of the biggest challenges I've faced.
I love that. So you were kind of sharing that you have a special project coming out to help out with the challenge of not finding quality materials. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I partnered with Bjorum Speech and we are working together to release two, possibly more, but for sure two decks in Spanish. One of them will be targeting syllable production because the Spanish language has a lot of multisyllabic words. There are very few single syllable words. And that's been one of the biggest challenges with some of my clients has been just the coordination of syllables. So there's that. And the original speech sound cue deck, we are working on making it fully in Spanish, including all possible sounds that can come out because there are some sounds in English that are just way more aspirated than in Spanish. And so I wanted the decks to reflect that. And I was able to meet with Jenny Bjorum and her chief of staff, Lauren Klein, back in November in ASHA, and we formed that partnership. So it's been very exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's so
Nicole,
awesome.
like, do you come up with those challenges too? Because I know you provide bilingual therapy as well.
I do. And trying to find materials was so difficult. I was able to get some cards that I found, but I mean, I don't get to use them that often. There's still so many like holes in what I actually need. I end up mostly just making my own stuff in PowerPoint and printing it. So I definitely sympathize with you on finding materials and most of what I have, like I've always kind of worked off some books that I've kind of collected over the years, but there's definitely not a ton of materials out there. So
Absolutely. I mean, I think actually I just made a reel for my Instagram on like just giving people permission to translate what they have because you'll
yeah.
find like these great products that come out, but they're in English and then you want it in Spanish. So I find myself translating a lot of things.
Yeah, I have some of the Piggy and Elephant books. I have those in Spanish, but a lot of my other books I like have written in and translated underneath all of the English.
I've done
So
that. Definitely. But, sometimes, like, with the original Bjorum Speech sound deck, I have used them to come up with the phonemes that I need, but then if I'm working with a bilingual child, it becomes challenging because in English, some of this like the K, for instance, the k sound is very aspirated in English, and in
yeah.
Spanish, it's more of a well, I don't know if you can even hear it in the audio here, but it's so small. It's not as aspirated, so I wanted different
Mhm.
representations of both of those things, and lucky for me, she agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Even with like I know I've always had a hard time with like trying to teach T where in Spanish it's barely there.
It's yeah, yeah, it's
So trying to teach that has definitely been a little difficult when doing some bilingual sessions with
it's
the
very,
materials I
very
have.
long. It's very
Yeah,
long. Yeah. Yeah.
definitely. What tips would you give to bilingual or polylingual families to navigate a speech delay?
Well, the first thing I always say is just keep speaking to your child in your heritage language because it's so important for them to have that cultural development. And a lot of people see that as like, I don't know, very like frou-frou talk, but I try to bring it home to families by saying, listen, if you, in my case, Spanish, if you don't speak to your child in Spanish, she will not speak to grandma. Like,
Mhm.
let that sink in for a second. There's a whole division of your family that won't be able to interact with your child. And then I get a lot of pushback like, oh, but the teacher only speaks English. Well, that teacher's only with that child for 1 year out of
Right.
their life. And who is your village when raising a family? It's ideally extended relatives and your community. And if you don't have that heritage language, then that sort of falls apart and the child can't participate fully in their culture. And
Yeah.
I don't just mean like the dancing and the food and the music. I just mean like being able to do life with your village. And so that's one of the things I try to bring home. And that usually strikes a chord with people.
Have you ever run into, speaking with families or having children who maybe they're a little bit more shy when speaking Spanish, or some tips to help support the family if the kids are starting to feel that? I know I've had a lot of families, and I experienced this too when I was younger, where you were more shy in school to share your culture, to share your language, and I know that that can have an impact on families sometimes on knowing what to do at home when they're navigating both languages.
Absolutely. I feel like personality differences come into play quite a bit when you're discussing cases like that. Some children become a little more self-conscious because all their friends in school are speaking English and then they don't want to speak Spanish and they don't want to present that side of themselves. And then you find that when these children grow up and become adults, they think, man, I wish I had more of it. I wish I had more of my culture. And the pride comes in a whole lot later. So what I tell families is make sure that you're continuing to speak to them in that home language. And if they answer you in English, just repeat back to them and then translate it. Just make sure they're always getting both. That way, I don't know if you're familiar with the show Que Pasa USA, where everything was in English and in Spanish. I'm like, turn your house into Que Pasa USA. That's fine. I always tell them just continue acknowledging and validating the way that they're speaking to you, whether it be in English or in Spanish, but repeat back. Repeat back in the heritage language, in Spanish and French and whatever language that may be. Oh, I run
Mhm.
into a
That's a
lot of
really
Korean
great
here.
tip. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
Mhm. And also another thing I try because being speech pathologist, we come across not just those instances, but children with language delays. And so we have people who say, I don't want them to be more delayed. I don't want them to get confused because they're having enough trouble speaking as it is. I just want them to speak something. That comes up often, very, very often. But all the research shows that language delays will be present whether you're speaking one or five languages to them. Why
Mhm.
limit it to five? I worked with a child with Down syndrome one time who spoke the family spoke 5 languages and the child navigated them perfectly. I had a child a child who is now a man who I worked with for many, many years, who had a very limited language repertoire, but he was able to translate for his mother when she would go to the grocery store and stuff because she only spoke Spanish. So children with delays, adults with delays can navigate between multiple languages. All the research shows that. So I just want to make sure that we're not also cutting out the village, the family, the support that is there for that child. And for the parents, let's face it, parents need that support as well.
Forgive my ignorance here. You're both gonna probably come at me with this. But, what is the research, or is it, like, still recommended, or is this completely thrown out the window that you teach, like, the heritage language, or you teach all of the languages, but, like, one caregiver speaks each of those languages? So, like, mom maybe only, like, speaks the Spanish, dad only speaks the English, so the child knows what to respond consistently to either parent.
I would never come at you for that. That's a great question. That's one of the models. That's one of the models for teaching a heritage language and for bilingualism. There are simultaneous language learners that are learning English and Spanish at the same time. There are sequential language learners who learn Spanish at home and English in school or whatever, or later on when they start school. There are families who adopt that model where, like, mom speaks one language, dad speaks another language. I've certainly run into families who do it that way. Those are all valid ways of teaching a child their heritage language. It comes down to family preference and what works for you as a family. Because if you have like, for instance, a father who speaks English and a mother who speaks English and Spanish, you want them to speak in Spanish, but you want them to also be able to speak to their father who only speaks English, you know? So it's important to model the appropriate syntax and the appropriate semantics in both languages because, again, we're not cutting out family members here.
Okay.
Mhm.
That makes me feel better because I recommended that in the past, but it was like for those parents who were concerned about the child getting confused because there were other factors going on like gestalt language processing and AAC devices. So I always recommended teaching the languages that they felt most comfortable speaking in. But if they wanted to have one parent speak the one language and the other parent speak the other one so that the child could respond consistently in those languages to either parent, then they could do it that way. So I'm glad that that hasn't been thrown out yet.
It's a valid model if it works for that family. The only thing I would add to that recommendation is that there is the part that you have to teach of language, which is the conversational aspect of it. So it's not always realistic if one parent is strictly speaking one language and one parent is strictly speaking the other, and then no conversation between the two are happening. So I want to make sure that parents understand when they listen to this and they listen to our recommendations in the future that as long as you're modeling the appropriate syntax, like the grammatical structure in the right way and all of that, instead of like speaking some broken English or some broken Spanish, then yes, absolutely. But I always recommend that families adopt the model in particular that works for them.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's probably what they're already using, right? But we're just needing to validate that for them.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of parents go with their gut feeling and then they hear external recommendations, which may or may not be right. And then they either change it or they just like stop altogether. So you're probably validating a lot of people who will be listening to this.
Yeah, that's my hope. Because a lot of people, I mean, a lot of Spanish speakers come to this country to look for opportunity, right? They come from a more negative circumstance in their own countries, and all these different countries, it's different. They come here for opportunity. They come here for a better life. And then the de facto language in the United States is English. It's not the official language, but it's the de facto language. Fun fact: the United States has no official language, but so families get here and they think we have to assimilate, we have to assimilate, we have to assimilate. And yes, absolutely. Assimilate to your new culture. It's part of life. You have to. But don't let go of those cultures that you bring. That's part of what makes this country so beautiful, that we're bringing in all these different cultures from different places, different food, different music, different languages. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I love the way you worded that. I think that's awesome. So, what are your tips for navigating cultural differences and educating families from different cultures on how to accept and proceed with speech and language challenges?
I just tell them, just keep talking to your child, get in front of their faces, just keep talking to them and both languages or all three of them or all five of them. I don't care. Make sure that you're continuing to include your child in conversations. Oh, here's a big one. I had a conversation with a family member of mine, and I said, you know what? I feel like sometimes with my own children or with my nieces that the Spanish that we're modeling for them is command based. Like we're telling them, come here, bring me this, take this to your sister, don't do that. And it's more commands and less conversation because as our families start growing in the United States, we're trying to focus a lot on getting through the day and we're not focusing on our conversational speech and we start to get to what is easier and when children start school English becomes very very prevalent and it becomes their preferred manner of speaking. So one thing I've been lately after this conversation lately been trying to recommend to my family is make sure that you're having actual quality conversations, that you're reading books that have rich vocabulary and things like that because if all the Spanish in my case that they're getting is command based directions, directives, then it's not going to be a quality model. And it's something that I found myself doing. I found myself just speaking to my children in commands when I was speaking to them in Spanish and then conversing with them more in English. And I said, I wonder why they're speaking a little less Spanish now. Ah, that's why. So now that self awareness has helped me apply it a little bit better, not just in practice, but at home as well.
Well, can I tell you that this is like, I think, an actual serious problem with second language learning or learning multiple languages at a time because my daughter and I have been trying to learn Mandarin together and now Spanish together. And the instructors that we've had who are certified in doing this, like it is so rigid, it's so academic focused. My daughter's 3. And I'm like, there's a huge disconnect with what we know from speech and language development to how these instructors are teaching children to learn another language. Like we worked with the Mandarin instructor for about a year. And it was like pulling teeth to explain to her, like, it needs to be play based. We don't need flashcards, we don't need PowerPoints, like just play and speak the language and kind of point out and use single words like during the play so that like it's more salient. But that is something that someone really needs to create. A certification program or an approach that, especially from a speech language pathology standpoint, knowing core vocabulary, like the words that we would always focus on was like nouns and French words. And so explaining to the instructor, like, just teach like go and want and that, like while we're playing, and it'll go so much further. So I took the time to learn those core words in Mandarin myself so that I could like model them for my daughter like throughout our play. But I think the instructor finally started to catch on like towards the end. We're taking a break now because it's a slow growing process, and when you're doing it only 30 minutes twice a week, like, the progress is very, very, very slow, and she's actually, like I said, doing, like, Spanish classes now. The other issue that we have is that my mother-in-law speaks Mandarin, but will not speak it to her. Like, will not. We'll try, but because my daughter doesn't, like, respond back to her in Mandarin, like, she just stops and then goes on and speaking English. I'm sure you run into this, like, all the time.
I run into it daily. Especially we all fall into the trap because I'm the first generation in my family born here in the United States. My parents, my grandparents were all Cuban. And so I run into it all the time where I had my brand new baby infant and I spoke to my children in Spanish only at home. And then when they start speaking and they start watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, nowadays Coco Melon, but I don't hate Coco Melon. I just can't stand it. I just can't stand how it sounds. But my children then start speaking to me in English, and me being an English speaker, speak it back to them, and then it just reinforces it. And so speaking the heritage language becomes more challenging because we fall into those traps. So I see it with like my parents, for instance, even though they were born in Cuba, speak perfect English. So my children speak to them in English and they speak back to them in English. And then we all go, oh my God, what are we doing? And we switch. And so as my children have gotten older, they prefer to speak English. And I'm like, no, come on, guys. So it's a huge challenge. And like you said, like your mother-in-law speaks Mandarin and you want her to speak Mandarin to your children. That's one of the things, because immersion is the best way. It's the best way because like you were saying about your Mandarin lessons, like 2 30-minute sessions a week is so little time compared to how much time you have in the entire week. Um, it's like when we have therapy sessions with our clients and we tell them, hey, we're practicing this twice a week, but then if there's no carryover, if the parents are practicing the strategies we give them, then we're going to be in therapy for a very long time. So yeah, I think that's where I was going with it.
Yeah, no, it's validating. It's a hard uphill battle when like neither parent speaks it either. And I can't force my mother-in-law to speak it.
Right.
We'll keep trying. And it's very expensive to have lessons. It was about $400 a month. We did
Yeah.
it for a year with very little progress. And my husband and I just said, let's just take a little break. She's in school till 4 now. So she is already super busy, but and I know people listening is probably like, well, you have to prioritize it. But it's like we have so many other things on our plate.
There are
Clearly.
so many things. We are chronically overworked and overscheduled. So sometimes you have to take a step back, breathe, and then get back to it. Otherwise, it's not going to be quality.
I agree. I totally advocate for that for my clients. Like take a break, especially after having a child now. I can't imagine doing something straight for 15 years. Like you need some time to yourself to regroup and then come back refreshed.
Yeah. It's like when I meet a family for the first time for initial assessment, I ask them before going into the nitty gritty of like the speech and language issues they might have. I ask them, what do you want to get out of this? That's my first question. What do you want to get out of this? Because sometimes, I mean, we've all seen it. We're all speech pathologists. You'll have a client who's in therapy for years and years and years for, I don't want to say an issue that's very, very challenging or would require a very long time in therapy. So I say, let's break it down. Let's make it digestible. What do you want to get out of this right now? Then when we reach that, we say, okay, now what? Now what do we want to get out of this? And make sure that we're always working to functional goals.
100%. I actually just ran into this with a new client. I would love a new client. I'm growing my private practice, but it just wasn't a good fit. This client was 24 years old, autistic adult, had functional communication. And towards the end of the session, I was talking to mom, like, what do you want to get out of this? What do you think therapy now is going to do that it hasn't done for the past 24 years?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I told them that I probably wouldn't be the best fit just because my skills are when language is emerging. Like I do the best work when language is emerging and we can identify are they an analytic or gestalt language processor and then provide supports and get them to functional communication as quickly as possible.
Yeah. That's why I try to get parents to nail down a very, very specific goal that they have. Like
Yeah.
in a case like that, what is it that you want to get out of this? And like I had one mom tell me, I need him to know his phone number. Okay. All right. That's an attainable, digestible goal. I had another mom of an adult with special needs who said to me, I need him to be able to activate his Alexa unit so that he can turn on the music he wants or turn on and off the lights to his room when he wants to play with his toys or whatever. I said, okay, great. Digestible, attainable goals. Because if not, you're just going to be in therapy forever. It's expensive and it becomes, what's the word? I mean, you get bored.
Monotonous.
It gets monotonous. Yeah, like the kids get bored and they go, okay, now what are we doing? That's why I like to keep them short and sweet so that we avoid those issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had speaking of cultural differences, I remember a couple months ago, I was reading a post from an article from the Washington Post that was talking about the Miami dialect. And I know you said that you were in Miami. How does that affect your practice or how you like build in with assessments of language? Because what my understanding of it was primarily an English dialect, but mostly with Spanish influence.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so the Miami dialect is a real thing. And so what we find is that like people who speak Spanish first and then start acquiring English later, they have influences from the initial language. But then when you have these people like myself who are being raised here in the United States, even though you were raised by a family of a different culture, your stronger language is English, but it has these influences. So, yes, the Miami dialect is very much a real thing, but how it affects me and my therapy, for instance, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. People speak the Miami dialect. It's very normal here. So if I see a language disorder, yes, we treat it. But a language difference like the Miami dialect, no. Like in the Miami dialect, they'll add like a schwa at the end of everything. So you'll see some people going, stop it just exists. It's a difference, not a disorder.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember as somebody who's not from Miami or has been to Miami, it's not something I've heard, but when I was reading the article, I thought it was kind of interesting that at least from the Washington Post, it was saying like, oh, now it's being recognized as like a difference, which I'm sure can help with some families who maybe felt like
I'm pretty sure
it wasn't as accepted.
I'm pretty sure I read that same article. I read either that one or one very similar to it that came out just a couple months ago, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty recent and just came to my mind.
Yeah. It's there. The Miami dialect is a real thing.
Interesting. So, how do you build rapport with caregivers responsible for a child when maybe they lean more towards denial or not accepting of a delay or some kind of diagnosis?
Yeah. Any kind of delay or diagnosis is going to be challenging for any family to navigate, of course. But sometimes I find in these families where you have immigrants and refugees and things like that, they came to this country for a better life and suddenly they're faced with this huge challenge that was unavoidable. And because these delays, they just come and they respond with denial because they came for something different, right? But whether they had stayed in their home country or not, this would have happened. The delays and diagnoses, they just happen, like we were saying. So I try to make sure that I'm really seeing the person who's experiencing the denial. So sometimes it's mom, sometimes it's dad. Usually it's not both because if I've been called, that means we're addressing it, right? So that takes one big challenge out of the way. But if there's one parent who's more in denial than the other, I try to make sure that I connect with that parent because sometimes that denial is a way of expressing that you need more help to understand this. So I try to look at sometimes dad, sometimes mom. So I try to look at the parent who's in denial and I say, okay, what do you see? What do you want to, like I was saying earlier, what do you want to get out of therapy? What do you want me to do here? And I try to get the words out of them so that I can address it further based on where they're at. Because sometimes you have one parent who's going, yes, I see this and this is what we need to do, and da 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 da. And the other parent's going, I don't know. And I'm like, all right. So then I focus on them and try to make sure they feel seen so they don't feel like they're just being steamrolled by this new clinician who showed up. And another thing I tell families all the time, monolingual or polylingual families, I tell them the parents are the team captain of team whatever. Let's say the child's name is John. This is team John. The parents are the captains and they have to be co-captains. There can't be one over the other in an ideal situation. I'm lucky enough to be a member of your team for this short period of time that you allow me to be here. But if at any point I am not meeting your goals and you're not getting what you wanted out of therapy with me, readjust your team. I have the great pleasure of being a part of many teams right now. And, you know, if I fit into your team, fantastic. Let's work together. But parents need to be empowered and they need to be seen because sometimes they feel like this therapist is coming in, is going to steamroll the whole process and reorganize their home. And that's not what it is at all. And so I try to make sure that they see that. And then, of course, emphasize that you can continue speaking to your child in your home language, and that's fine.
Do you think that and helping them understand that they can speak in their native language is what helps build that trust with you? Or I guess, like, what other tip do you use to help kind of build that trust with the family?
I hope so. I hope it does help them feel more comfortable. I have some families who look at me and just go like sigh of relief. Then I have other families who are like who maybe they themselves thought that this was going to confuse them, so they don't. And then you see grandma in the background going, "Aha, I told you we could speak it." And then I'm like, listen, I'm not here to start anything. I'm just here to lay down the facts. So I just try to stick to truth, stick to the facts, and let everything evolve for that child the way it should.
Amazing.
Yeah.
This has been great. And I think it's really inspiring for any other bilingual SLPs who are maybe the focus of their practice.
Mhm.
So, where can everyone find and connect with you if they're not already?
So my Instagram is probably the best way because my website's going through an overhaul right now. So my Instagram is just one word, no spaces, Miami Speech Therapy, just completely spelled out. And so yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody who has further questions.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martha. This has been great. And I look forward to connecting with you some more in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank